Invest Africa, proudly brought to you by KPMG.
Hello and welcome to Invest Africa. I'm Nozi Pombandra. Now, for the past 50 years, the scattered, unreliable state of data on African business and finance has deterred access to capital, and it's also deterred and hampered growth. This state of affairs seems to be changing steadily, and this with an array of big data tools that are coming to the market and transforming the process for a multitude of users, including farmers, small business owners, policymakers, as well as international stakeholders looking to invest on the African continent. Tonight, Invest Africa explores the role and the impact of big data on investment. And joining me at the desk to unpack this rather chunky term, I'm joined by Udvir Sitaram. He's the head of analytics at FNB Business, as well as Karin Kruger, who's associate director responsible for data and analytics at KPMG South Africa. Thank you guys for making the time to join us. Udvir, let me start off with just making the distinction between data and big data. What makes big data big data?
I think the easiest sort of distinction here is to say that data normally comprises internal and a little bit of external information. Big data would be much more focused on external information that arrives very, very quickly and can be a bit complex to go and interpret. So you have your technical definitions of it, but high level, it's meant to be large amounts of information that arrive very quickly, and they sometimes can be a bit complex to go and interpret.
Would you go with the same distinction, Karin? It's large and oftentimes arising unexpectedly and quickly?
Absolutely. I think probably the single biggest difference in how we used to deal with data is that we had quite traditional data structures, and it was easy fitting data into those structures and analyzing the data. Where with big data, due to just the sheer volume of data and the different formats, it's a bit more tricky, and we need to get our heads around that.
Why does it matter though, Karin? If I'm a business owner, I'm sitting pretty as a CEO, not necessarily a market leader, but I'm doing well in terms of my own market share, why should I be paying attention to big data?
Data is the new currency, and that's how you derive value and a competitive edge. If you can harness the data both from inside and outside your organization and make decisions really fast, sometimes in real time, that unlocks so much value and a competitive advantage, which you will be missing out if you almost turn a blind eye to what is happening in the world.
So there's an element of agility that data gives you, Udvir. What else can one put in that bag of arsenal and saying, this is what big data is actually giving me?
So big data would be something that gives you the competitive edge. Data by itself means very little unless it can be turned into actionable insights.
Right.
So it becomes very easy to go and say, let's analyze stuff. If we're not going to take action from what we analyze, then what are we really doing? So to the point of being able to react quickly and to react with agility, if you make that first mover advantage in your industry, in your surroundings, you then get to effectively have greater profits or greater income for your business.
You've used a term that I just think has begun to be thrown around very carelessly, and that's insights. And you have a lot of these companies coming to the market and say, oh no, we're giving you insights.
Yes.
Does every company that does insight actually move from a big data premise? I mean, I don't always get the sense that that connection is there.
Yeah, so I would say insight in general is providing, let's call it a conclusion or a statement that you did not really see in the raw detail behind it. Whether that insight is relevant to you, whether that insight comes from big data or not, that then goes to what the company is trying to go and solve for. So you might have insight that you get from your internal resources, which can then be either, let's call it enhanced, or maybe not even enhanced at all, maybe complete opposite. It could be contradictory to what the big data says about the same problem at hand.
So certainly it's a question of insights, Karin, but it's also about seeing the trend really quickly and then making a decision about how do you react to that trend.
Yep, and that's absolutely the power of big data, is knowing very clearly what's the business problem that you're trying to solve, and then turning the data that you gather into actionable insights, which really makes an impact on where you're heading with your business or how you interact with your customers or your suppliers in real time, fast, and that gives you that advantage.
So let's bring it down to a company level. Where would we see big data in action? In which parts of the business would we see this?
So I'm going to use a banking example. Bit of my background that I'll give away here. So if you look at fraud management,
yes,
that's probably a very nice example of how banks are harnessing big data and real-time insights, where as soon as someone transacts, and it falls without the norm of how this person has been transacting with that bank,
yeah,
it flags indications that this is potential fraud.
And this is why Nozipho would get an SMS saying, why are you swiping your credit card 20 times today? This is not normal.
Absolutely, and that's a very simplistic form, but that's sort of the power of making decisions in real time as it happens, and putting a very positive customer experience spin on that. Because I can assume as a consumer, you're quite glad that you get those phone calls,
right,
and you're like, thank goodness it's me and it's not someone that stole my credit card.
Absolutely, and we also see it in the automotive and insurance space, where when your car hits a pothole, then you get the call that, are you okay? Which is obviously, as you say, a really fantastic way of driving a positive customer experience outside of the banking sector. And I know I'm being unfair because you sit within banking, right? Outside of the business sector, another example you'd be, where do we see big data?
Cool. I would say it is more of an up-and-coming and emerging industry, especially in South Africa, much less so in Africa, would be your agricultural industry. To go and say, well, big data refers to this information that we're getting from, let's say, farmers that reside in a particular province. So as an individual farmer, if you are trying to optimize the output of your crop, so you're trying to plant, you're trying to find the best season to plant, you're trying to find the best time to plant, you're trying to find the best way to plant, that might be done and you might have your solution for it, but the power of big data comes into harnessing that aggregated information to say, well, you're doing it this way and you're doing well. What happens if you look at the guy that's doing better than you, or the population that's doing better than you, and you can actually learn and leverage insights off from them? So in the agri industry, for example, from, let's call it your basic machinery, operating a machinery, to say, on a large plantation, when is my machinery going to break down? Can it actually have enough fuel to get from point A to point B? To a much more aggregated level of, well, if I want to plant crops, what's the best way to do so? What is the best time of the day to do so? What's the best way to go about planting them? How much further into the ground do they need to be given these new drought conditions that are happening? So that information is normally available to an individual farmer, and it can be aggregated with let's call it societies and those type of organizations, but it's very hard to actually take that information and disseminate it across everyone. With big data, you have the information that's collected, you have a means of disseminating that, and also the SMS example, if you can get an SMS that says, or some software that tells you how to do things optimally,
it sounds like a no-brainer, right? It sounds like a no-brainer, Karin, like every business should be harnessing big data. But what's the cost? Is it expensive to have an effective big data management system within the company?
So quite a lot of the big data tools are the true traditional first starters are open source tools, but a lot of the software providers have started bolting that onto their solutions, and that can get quite pricey. Generally, I don't see the biggest cost in terms of hardware and software necessarily. Where I see quite a lot of people that I deal with daily lose a lot of money in big data endeavors is that they don't have a clear problem that they're trying to solve. So they throw these, yes, they are expensive tools together with really expensive resources, and give them an open door almost with, go and find some insights. And they come back with insights that's not relevant and it's not answering a business problem.
So
and that
becomes expensive. So where do you start? Do you first identify a problem, or say, maybe this isn't a problem, but I would really like to see my sales increase. So what is it that I could possibly do? And then unleash sort of your big data weaponry, if I may call it that, to try and help you unlock some of those bottlenecks. Or do you go big data first and then figure out the problem after it?
So I think organizations need to keep quite a nice balance.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's important to know what your business problem is or where you'd like to focus. And it might be an innovative idea that you would like to be supported by data. Or it might be that you are worried about agricultural weather insurance and you want to see what you can do. And then you go and look for the data. Starting with the data and looking at it and see what problem this can solve might lead you down the wrong path. Although I would pretty much encourage everyone to keep a portion of that and that curiosity to just play with the data and come up with insights that you might not have expected
and
at
of
all.
course, that proactiveness that you speak about is also important, but balancing that out, of course, with looking at real problems. But on the average CEO's desk is possibly huge pile of things that need to be done and signed off. How important is big data? Are you seeing CEOs saying, okay, let's invest in big data to get the efficiencies running in this company?
I'd say, at least from the financial industry perspective, from banks in particular, the power and the, let's call it, benefit of using big data accurately, using analytics accurately, has been on the increase over the past, call it 2 to 3 years. Previously, big data used to be a buzzword that everyone knew about, but didn't really know what to call it and how to define it. Now it's becoming a bit more mainstream to go and say, well, we need these data scientists, we need the analytics teams, we need these people that can provide us with the insight to say, well, here is what they do on a daily basis. They look at data, they examine it, they have a question that we ask them, and or they are curious enough to come up with questions by themselves. So the importance has been increasing in organizations. I think it's also, to the previous point, very industry specific, to say that some industries are much further along the curve compared to others.
So Nosipa, I can quantify that. We've done a survey where we asked the C-suite as a whole, globally, are data and analytics important to you?
Yes.
And 56% of C-suite people being interviewed said that it's absolutely important, and that they've started aligning their business strategies to start catering specifically for business or for big data, and helping them to move from being a process-driven organization to data-driven, and making decisions and future strategies based on what the data tells them.
So you touched on an earlier point around the soft infrastructure, and of course also the idea that the soft infrastructure, the people infrastructure around it, just isn't quite the most affordable skills to get into the business. How are we doing, Yudhvir, as a country in terms of building skills that can really engage with big data meaningfully?
That's a bit of a difficult question, actually, because as much as we might have the universities coming up with analytically driven programs, it is very difficult to find a data scientist and analytics person that has the skill sets of both the technical side, the maths and the stats, as well as a bit of the business acumen side, so like your commerce type backgrounds. It's very difficult to have that all-in-one package type individual. We've seen some universities start with those programs over the past year, so the only thing that we can say is at least we're on the right path for that. But typically the scarcity of analytic skills in this country, at the very least, is extremely short in supply.
Well, on that point, there's a real scarcity when it comes to analytical skills that can really engage with big data in South Africa. We are on the right path, but we could certainly be moving faster. Let's take a short break. When we come back, we go just a little bit deeper into this conversation around big data, and maybe even talk about some of the red flags that each company should look out for. I'll see you in a minute. Welcome back, and thank you for staying with us on Invest Africa. Still with me, my guests in Johannesburg, Yudhvir Sitharam, Head of Analytics at FNB Business, and Karin Kruger, Associate Director responsible for Data and Analytics at KPMG South Africa. Now, before we went to break, we were talking about the scarcity of skills to feed into big data in South Africa. Karin, I want to bring your views into this as well. Yudhvir is of the view that we're on the right track. Universities are trying to get it right. How do we fast track? And do we have other markets that have done really well in terms of building the people infrastructure around big data?
So absolutely, people is your biggest investment in this space. And what happens quite often is because the skills that are good with data and analytics get thrown into a variety of areas in the business instead of being harnessing to deliver value. The good news is that technology has caught up on this, and quite a lot of new software tools allow for drag and drop functionality, so you don't need to be a full-blown data scientist to get some basic insights out of your data. Normal people can play with data, come up with insights that can help them in decision making. And if companies start harnessing that idea, they can free up those very scarce skills to start doing the real impactful analytics, which does require more data scientist type mindset.
Right. Let's take the conversation to the investor mindset, Yudhvir, because at the end of the day, investors are watching this show and they obviously want to get a sense of whether companies are grappling and understanding big data. Yes. As an investor, what would I look for in a company before I invest in it, especially if that company claims to have big data capacity?
So the idea here is to say that assuming the company has big data capacity, they would have been generating greater revenue, greater profit margins, or at least there'll be more optimal compared to the average company. So in investing in any company, you still need to do analysis of fundamentally, do the financials look fine? Does the perception of the company look fine? Does the product line, does the industry all seem to be something that you as an investor want to get into? The aspect of big data too that simply goes and says, well, the company has been doing things by itself. Now with big data, I should expect a rapid increase in sales or a rapid let's call it improvement of my profit margins. Compare that to your industry, and you would expect this company to be greater than the industry norm. So if the company then claims to be, well, having big data and using it is two different things.
Yeah.
If they claim to be using it effectively, then we would see this industry, this company being much greater than the industry norm.
So industry leaders, it would be a given that you'd be an industry leader if you're harnessing big data quite well. What's your view on this, Karin? What would you be looking for as an investor?
So what I'll be looking for, and we've actually proven this, is that if a company puts a clear strategy in their financial statements about their data and analytics ambitions, if you look at listed companies, they generally have a higher shares earning. So it absolutely feeds through. If they're really truly harnessing it, make it important enough to put it as a statement in their financials that is very evident in their share price and in their performance. So for me, as almost going in, making a quick decision on where I should invest my money, that would be what I'd be looking for. Is there a statement around their analytics ambitions?
I want to talk about the red flags, because it certainly has been sounding very rosy up until now. Where are the weaknesses and the vulnerabilities around big data, and what should you be looking out for as a company that's decided to go into making sure that you're harnessing big data?
Cool. So we've kind of touched on two of them already.
Yeah.
The one would be the hardware and software available for this. It's that as much as things might be available, as a small company, the cost might be too much for you. As a big company, how do you scale up to get this analytical ability throughout your organization? So one would be your infrastructure type restrictions. The second one would be also what we talked about from a, let's call it integrity or accuracy point of view. Of as much as you can gather all this information together, well, the accuracy is only based on aggregation. So how do you know, what is the benchmark that you're comparing things to? Number three would be the scarcity of skills. Especially if you look at any country where the data programs are not as, let's call it developed or advanced universities, that's going to become a problem.
Certainly. Not a list of three, which is, I still think is palatable. Are you going to add to that, Karin?
For me, the key areas is data security and veracity of your data. Can you actually trust the data you keep? Or can you trust it enough to make decisions based on it? And are you sure that decisions won't put you at risk? And then just security of data. There's been... The news is flooded with breaches of data. And I think with big data and the sheer volume, lots of organizations are grappling with how do we know what to store in terms of big data, and how do we keep that safe and secure? The reputational damage is not worth getting that one wrong.
And of course, as you speak, I'm thinking of the Panama Papers, as the Snowden incident, which is a bit older. But has this deterred the appetite to invest in big data? Because when something like this breaks, it's a global catastrophe.
I don't think it has deterred. I think that's the ugly stepsister of big data. Everyone liked the sexy front end and all the insights you can gain and the business value. I think this has forced people to take a step back and realize that, as with normal data, you need to keep your house in order. You need to have the appropriate governance structures around your data. Keep it safe, keep it clean. And that's not always a message that people like to hear. I think the importance of that has been escalated significantly. So I do think we'll see a lot more time and effort placed there, which ultimately will have benefits in the output coming out of the analytics. So absolutely worthwhile investment from my perspective.
Would you say that there's a debate around the security of data versus transparency?
Again, dependent on industry. So I'd say that securing data is awesome to go and say that you have secure access in and out of that database, that data warehouse of information. Transparency, on the other hand, talks to either is it between the company or inside the company itself, is there transparency within the company, which again, there's various arguments of should everyone have access to the same amount of information, as well as transparency between the consumer and the business. So in order to, I guess, let's call it prevent those type of things from happening, you have seen regulation in South Africa slowly starting to get to that point, where at some point in this year we have the sort of implementation of the POPI Act, the Protection of Personal Information. So we are moving in that direction of being a bit more transparent, but simultaneously to make sure that security is still top notch, because it's pointless sharing information and being transparent of it if it is easy enough for anyone to get access to it. It kind of is, let's call it, they both work against each other in some cases.
It's finding that pieces of information that sensitive that you need to protect.
Yes.
Instead of spending a lot of money protecting all your data when it's not needed.
But this also comes to the heart of a debate that I was actually having with the Statistician General of South Africa, and he was saying the ownership of data is very important. And obviously, as the Statistician General, he'd say the state should own big data. And obviously, you've also got corporates who are the actual owners of big sets of data. So where are we in that debate?
So that for me is a crucial point in organizations, is to have clear ownership of data. And that might not reside with a single person, generally with a data council that collectively is responsible for managing data as an asset, which it absolutely is across the organization. And that council takes ownership and accountability for the data. And first and foremost, their role is to make sure the data is clean, and as soon as it's not, to take corrective action, but also to keep the data safe. And so ownership for me should never reside with a single person or a single entity as such, more at an organization level.
So you'd also go with that disintegrated approach to the ownership of data?
Yes, agree. It's less about ownership as opposed to regulation and management of it. So it's the same type of question as saying who owns the internet. There's a lot of areas that can regulate and make sure that things, let's say, work legally on that. So if you were to sell products on the internet, there's certain rules and regulations behind that. The same idea with big data, where if it is publicly available information, the public needs to have some management authority over it to say, cool, these are the do's and don'ts of it. But at the same time, we also need to make sure that the ownership does not reside with a single entity or single organization, because then you get into much more complicated issues of transparency.
Let me be difficult, and let me just throw the FBI Apple situation into the room. I mean, in your view, what should have been the right way to go about this? I understand the FBI ended up using a third entity to unlock this password. What's your take on this? And then I'll get Karin's.
I would think there it's that, yes, the data was highly secure. that points towards security. However, transparency is a bit of up in the air area where, yes, as much as there might be a legal reason to access that data, there still is the protection of the consumer at hand. So in judging any of those situations, you need to make sure what is more important. Is it there as, again, from a legal perspective for the benefit of the public, or is it there for the benefit of an individual organization or person?
Right, so you're doing a tricky balancing act there. You're very smart. Okay, Karin?
So, and I think that boils back to there's no such thing as bad data, only bad users of data or uses of data. And that's, I think, the very difficult situation that Apple found themselves in, with having made a commitment to their customer that we will protect your data and protect your device. And the legal entity on the other side being FBI that needs that information. And I think in those very grey areas, that's where we look to sort of the courts and the legal profession to give us sort of a benchmark of this is what will happen in this situation that is generally socially acceptable.
Right. And of course, there's also the business space for companies that crack the security of secure data, as we saw in this case. But I want to bring another macro issue onto the table. Karin, we often hear analysts saying that, oh, you can't trust the data from China, but it is what it is. So they come out and they tell us that they're growing at 6.3% in terms of GDP, and global markets will move on the basis of this number. But yet there's this overwhelming perception that you can't trust the numbers coming out of China. How do you begin to even process a context like that?
So generally, I would caution anyone to just take data at face value and trust the numbers and start doing a bit of sense check. The beauty of the age of information is that there's so many sources available at which you can go and correlate that information and get a sense for yourself whether, if this number is repeated at a couple of sources, you can add some level of trust to it. If you, however, find very different answers, then you should start caution it. But it raises a valid point. Lots of organizations throw their hands in the air and say, I can't do anything with my data because I can't trust it. There's so much you can do in terms of determining the level of trust you can put on your data. And even if you know that you can only trust 50 or 40% of your data, then you know when you make decisions that that's the level of trust that you can put in your data, and it doesn't prohibit you from analytics. I would encourage people to use a variety of sources to correlate some output.
So, and that gets to the heart of the verification of your data. We've got about 2 minutes left to end of show. So I'd want to get a sense from you. We often also hear that in Africa you can't trust the data because it's unreliable and so forth. Do you get a sense that we're moving in the right direction, that African governments and leaders are beginning to say we need to focus on making sure that that the numbers that are informing our decisions are credible and reliable.
Yes, I'd say definitely. In the information age as such, we seem to be seeing a lot more users that are getting onto electronic platforms, whether it's mobile, online, any type of electronic usage platform. And that data also then points back to the, let's call it, accuracy or the safekeeping of the organization itself. So if you have an international company that's coming in to invest in Africa, you would then presume that the safeguards and processes of the international company are then transferred also into their branch in a particular African country. For countries that are starting off in Africa by their own business models, that's where it can become a bit tricky to go and say, well, what can I rely on, what can't you rely on? But it's a very theoretical or philosophical point rather of you only know what to rely on after you actually use it. So it's impossible for you to go and say at face value, this is going to be 100% accurate. You need to then go and check against other sources to see what, okay, if this is what I get, what do other people get as well? And that points to a bit of a sense and sanity check on the idea.
A sense and sanity check. Last comment, Karin. Anything that you're seeing on the African landscape that's at least giving you the optimism that we're on the right track?
Absolutely, a lot of optimism. If I look at case studies of what's being done in Africa, I get tremendously excited. And I'll share one of those with you. In Kenya, there's an insurance product called Kalima Salama, which is all about big data and mobile platforms. And ultimately what it boils down to is a small-scale farmer will go and buy his farming supplies, take a photo of it, upload it to this insurance company, and they'll know what this man is planting, when he can expect to harvest, and if anything happens in weather patterns. And that's the big data angle. They've got the weather patterns and weather predictions for the next couple of years or next couple of months. If anything happens in the weather patterns, they pay out his claim automatically if weather patterns change. And that for me is the true power of big data, and it got rid of so many obstacles we've got in Africa, and it's such a sleek solution, and that gives me tremendous optimism for what we can do as a continent.
Sense and sensibility and sleek solutions, this is what we can expect from big data, and it certainly seems that we are in the right direction. Thank you so much for making the time to join us today, and of course a big thank you to my guests for making time to sit with me tonight. Yudhvir Sitharam, Head of Analytics at FNB Business, and Karin Kruger, Associate Director responsible for Data and Analytics at KPMG South Africa. Now for you at home, if you would like to contribute to these conversations, all you need to do is just follow us on Twitter, that's at CNBC Africa, and follow me at The Real Nosy. Don't forget the hashtag, it's Invest Africa. Let us know what you would like to see on the show. Next week, we turn our focus to cyber security and whether South Africa is a sitting duck. I'll see you then.